My name is Julia Kuhn and I'm the co-chair of the Hong Kong International Literary Festival. It's my great pleasure today to welcome you to the 21st festival, the Rebound edition. We're now almost halfway through our 10-day festival, which continues until the 15th of December. Please do go to our website, www.festival.org.hk, and browse through our brochure and our range of programs. We have online events today and tomorrow, and starting on Thursday, we also present a weekend of more than 50 events that can be attended in person at the Asia Society, the Fringe Club, and also Tycoon, starting on a high note, a very high note, with the 2021 Booker Prize winner Damon Galgut, who will join us from London on Thursday, the 11th. For tonight's event, we're delighted to present the poet Banu Kapil in conversation with Collier Nogas. We're very grateful to both of them for joining us today, and to the University of Chicago and the University of Hong Kong for co-sponsoring this event. Particular thanks are due to Josephine McDonough and her colleagues in Chicago for all their help in putting this event together. In just a minute, I will hand over to Joe to say a few words, but before we start, do note a few housekeeping items, please, about Crowdcast. Do feel free to post comments in the chat on the right-hand side of the screen. If you have questions for the speakers, put them in the Q&A box at the bottom right of the screen. Click on the green button at the bottom of the screen at any time, and you'll be connected to the website of our festival bookseller, Bookazine, and you can buy Banu's book there. The event will remain on Crowdcast until the end of November, so you can watch it anytime on demand. Until then, we'll also be adding Chinese subtitles within a few days. Finally, I'd like to thank all of our cultural partners, our sponsors and donors, for their generous support. It is them who make these events possible, just like you, the audience, do. In particular, on the donor side, I'd like to acknowledge an ongoing grant from the Standing Committee on Language, Education and Research. But now over to you in Chicago, Joe. I hope you will all enjoy the conversation.
Well, good morning or good evening. My name is Josephine McDonough, and I'm George M. Pullman Professor of English at the University of Chicago. It's a great pleasure to be involved in this event, which is co-sponsored, as Julia said, by the University of Chicago and the School of English in Hong Kong University and the Hong Kong Literary Festival. It's been organised as part of, or should we say something of a foretaste of a conference that Julia and I are convening on literature and migration. It's called Exodus and Exile, and it will take place in Hong Kong and Chicago in December 9th and 10th. This particular event has been extremely tricky to organise. It's truly transnational, and I'm quite thrilled that we're welcoming participants in the UK, the US and Hong Kong. But the time zone issues mean that it's extremely early in the morning for us here in Chicago and somewhat late for you in Hong Kong and somewhere in between in Europe for Banu. Nonetheless, we're very much looking forward to hearing the distinguished poet Banu Kapil speaking with Collier Nogas, now in Hong Kong. Later this morning for us, at 10 a.m. US Central Time, we will reconvene for a second meeting of conversation and discussion with Banu and my colleague at the University of Chicago, Jennifer Scapitoni. And if anyone would like to join that meeting who doesn't have the details of how to join, please send a note to the chat and we can contact you. But my role now is a very simple one, and that is to introduce the introducer, and it is a great pleasure to do that. So Collier Nogas is an adjunct assistant professor of English at Hong Kong University and a poet too. Her poetry collections are the hybrid print and interactive The Ground I Stand On Is Not My Ground, which was chosen by Forrest Gander as winner of the inaugural Drunken Boat Poetry Book Prize. And on the other side, Blue, her work has been supported by fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the UCross Foundation, Vermont Studio Center, and Lingnan University. And it's appeared in many publications, Jacket 2, ASAPJ, The Volta, etc. Collier is a core collaborator in the Yale NUS project Document, which gathers artists and writers, historians to explore transdisciplinary approaches to archives, and she edits the poetry parts of the journal Duked. So I'm going to hand over to Collier now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Josephine and Julia, and everyone who's made this possible, including all of you who are waking up or staying up to join us across at least 3 time zones. It's my pleasure to introduce now Banu Kapo, who is a poet and fellow of Churchill College. She is the author of 6 books, most recently Schizophrene and Ban et Banlieue, both from Nightboat Books, and How to Wash a Heart from Liverpool University Press this past year. How to Wash a Heart was the winner of the T.S. Eliot Prize. Kapil is the recipient of a Chumley Award from the Society of Authors and a Wyndham Campbell Prize for Poetry from Yale University. Currently, she lives and works in Cambridge, England. Please welcome Banu. So Banu, I'm hoping that you would read a little for us from How to Wash a Heart so that we can hear it with you.
Thank you, Collier, and thank you for introducing me as well. I'm suddenly recalling the dictum from cinema, day is night, night is day. And so I've drawn the curtains here in England to replicate a late evening or pre-dawn ambiance. So I shall read from this fabricated cinema cubicle, and I'll simply read from How to Wash a Heart. You know, it's so strange to read from a book. I think of poetry or writing or the thing that we call the work. I'm never quite sure that it's the same thing as the book. It briefly crystallizes in a book. But as I was reflecting on what I could read and sort of some energy about remembering, you know, completely, brilliantly, like what it was I had written, I'd like to say that for me, the books tend to shed off. They're absorbed into the time in which they were written. I hope that they reach others, but I don't have a lot of feeling always for how that happens. And so, you know, just some context. This is a book that I wrote very swiftly in the span of about 2 weeks. But if I had to count the actual time, I think that I must have written it. This is if I'd stayed awake all night drinking cappuccino. I think I wrote it in about 2 days. Yeah. So it's a very swift gestural work. And in reading from it today, I'm trying to reconnect with the energy of that gesture. And I'm not sure how it is out of context, a book intended to be read in one go whilst drinking tea on a freezing cold English morning, etc. But I thought I would simply read the first section, which might be grounding for our conversation. And also perhaps the context and the time of writing was definitely at the apex of hostile immigration policy in the US and the UK. It was the time, it still is the time, of children in cages on the US-Mexico border, deportations, abrupt deportations, the Windrush horror here in the United Kingdom. And so what I've written is, the phrase comes from Derrida, I suppose, an account of conditional hospitality. It's someone with an uncertain or precarious status who's been invited to stay in somebody else's home. And so this is the opening. The guest is making themselves at home in this new environment. Perhaps they've been there for a few days, and there are the beginnings of conversations and encounters with the host's adopted daughter. So, how to wash a heart. Like this. It's inky early outside and I'm wearing my knitted scarf like John Betjeman, poet of the British past. I like to go outside straight away and stand in the brisk air. Yesterday, you vanished into those snowflakes like the ragged beast you are. Perhaps I can write here again. A fleeting sense of possibility, K. Keywords, hospitality, stars, jasmine, privacy. You made a space for me in your home for my books and clothes, and I'll never forget that. When your adopted daughter, an Asian refugee, as you described her, came in with her coffee and perched on the end of my cot, I felt so happy and less like a hope. Showed her how to drink water from the bowls on the windowsill. I don't want to beautify our collective trauma. Your sexual brilliance resided, I sometimes thought, in your ability to say, no matter the external circumstances, I am here. From this place, you gave only this many desiccated fucks about the future. Day by day, you discovered what happiness is. As your guest, I trained myself to beautify our collective trauma. When night fell at last, I turned with a sigh towards the darkness. I am about to squeeze out an egg, you murmured as you kissed me goodnight. Hold a funeral for the imagination, I thought. To my left is a turquoise door, and to my right, a butcher's table. Above you is a heart beating in the snow. When I described the set of my play, an environment more vivid to me than the memory of my childhood home, your face turned green. What made you know something was over? The milk in your eyes scared me. In that moment, I understood that you were a wolf capable of devouring my internal organs if I exposed them to view. Sure enough, the image of a heart carved from the body appeared in the next poem you wrote. There's a bright call of fire and cream as I write these words, stretching out these early spring or late winter mornings with coffee and TV. I don't remember the underneath, everything I will miss when I die. It's exhausting to be a guest in somebody else's house forever. Even though the host invites the guest to say whatever it is they want to say, the guest knows that host logic is variable. Prick me and I will cut off the energy to your life. How to wash a heart? Remove it. Animal or ice? The curator's question reveals their power style. If power implies relationship, then here we are at the part where even if something goes wrong, that's exactly how it's meant to be. Your job is to understand what the feedback is. It's such a pleasure to spend time outside the house. There's nowhere to go with this except begin, to plunge my forearms into the red ice that is already melting in the box. My spiritual power was quickly depleted by living with you. Like an intrusive mother, you cared for my needs, but also I never knew when you might open my door, leaving it open when you left. My identity as a writer was precarious during the time I lived with you. Once you locked me in, an accident, my spine against a tree when I dreamed that night. Contact nature on all fours, said the counselor, slipping off her chair onto the floor. Help me to repair what is broken and immortal. Is that the bin? I come from a country all lime pink on the soggy map. Destroy me, my soul whispered. Eat me, bones and all. Crush me in a vise. Stop me from walking out that door. The balloon deity I made from the condom on the floor was purgative, revolting, brilliant. Her lips were pursed. It doesn't matter that you made so many mistakes, she said. Violence rots the brain. Go. I do not enjoy eating too much. It's so painful. The only remedy is the bitter herb that grows by a rushing brook. Oils, sugars, pearls, crushed diamonds, linens and songs populate your crappy cabinets. Make a list of what you need and I will get it. You ungrateful cow. This is what I need. The light and the heat and the yesterday of my work. A candle on the wonky table at dusk. How time migrates. The chalky blue flowers. I need something that burns as slowly as that. Because living with someone who is in pain requires you to move in a different way. You bang the cup down by my sleepy head. The end.
Not the end.
The first section.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. Maybe a good place to start. When you write in the section that you just read about plunging, the voice of the book says, there's nowhere to go but to begin. Plunge my forearms into the red ice that is already melting in the box. And in the endnotes, you explain that that's a reference to a performance artwork, which shares the title,
yes.
How to Wash a Heart. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that and about the genesis of the book. You said it was very brief and gestural, but that you had been working up to it, perhaps for a while.
Thank you, Collier. I've read from this book like in the year that it came out, and sometimes I'm invited to give readings, but I try to, I think, slow down. And I had that kind of experience today, kind of combining, what it will be to remember how a book was formed, even though, I find a book, as I said, to be quite an ephemeral artifact ultimately. But as I was reading slowly enough for the imaginary but very real audience, and perhaps as well for myself, for you, for our connection, our relationship as poets, to begin the experience of listening and speaking to each other, I noticed, these images which seem to form. And what is the lineage of an image? I think you're asking me. Do images come with their own history? Are they partial? Are they fragments? Do they have their own theory? And I think I noticed that exact moment. And I think just at the start, trying to contextualize, of course, I forgot that this book is also the aftermath, or composed from the detritus of an installation or performance or offering at ICA London under with a curation by Rosalie Dubal as part of a larger installation on the oeuvre of Kathy Acker. And it was also a collaboration with my sister, Rohini Kapil, who's a visual artist. And so as part of that, the event had the same title. And something on titles is that, like, you know, several months in advance, you're invited to improvise, to build something, to collaborate, but you have to submit a title for the marketing of this as yet to be dreamed of event. And so it just, the worst, yeah. So I just came up with it out of the blue and thought, okay, I'll work towards that. So in the end, it became like wanting to take up another work that I've written called Schizophrene, and to just develop that thinking in the axial space between migration and mental health. So that's really been my work. And I began to think about cardiovascular health, heart health, and the impact of stressors related to migration. So when I say that, like, part of the research that I looked into comes from the work of Kamaldeep Bui and Dinesh Bugra here in the UK. And the astonishing finding, and I don't know how that would land in this present moment, but one of their findings, looking at populations of, you could say, South Asian, I don't think they would use that language here, but immigrants of Indian and Pakistani origin, looking at community health factors in particular neighborhoods in Northwest London. And their finding was that migration was not the stressor, but rather it was ethnic density, meaning what it is to be in a mostly white space, or the moment in a trajectory where you move neighborhoods. So you move out of the neighborhood that is subject to daily violence, or whatever it is. It's actually that shift and ethnic density that their research populates like that particular stressor. So that's what I was doing. And I thought, like, as I'm kind of giving this talk and reading from this work and thinking actually for that performance and installation about images, meaning, in poetry, or when you write a poem, the thing that, denotes value, receives value, transmits value is, things like repetition, or how clear the image is, how granular, how acute, you could say. But thinking, not through other disciplines, but other ways of being in my own body, and thinking about my family, thinking about historical trauma, cultural trauma, somatic kind of experiences of carrying glimpses and images that never ebbed off. I really wanted to speak to that. Like, what would it be to kind of think of the images in the poems and to bring them out into performance, into artifact, and you could say to pour water on them, to watch them dissolve in the time of the performance. So that's what I was doing. And I had the idea, like, I'm gonna wash a heart. I got to London and Rosalie had arranged with a butcher in the East End, and this is horrible, this next part. A sequence of 6 pig hearts were in the freezer of the ICA. And that was over in about 2 minutes. I was like, I'm not going to be washing this proximal animal, human resembling heart. No. And so the next thing was trying to remember, to think about like an ice heart, a red ice heart. And I'd done some of this stuff like in diversity training, like being a minority faculty in a mostly white university. It was often like, oh, can you give a presentation? Can you be on that committee? Can you present on the findings of the diversity committee? And I think that was 2015 when I first had the idea to get food coloring, water, freeze a heart, and I would open it during the kind of dull address to the majority faculty. And so a silicone mold was commissioned and red ice was poured in, but it was so precarious when it arrived that we realized that to open it would be to destroy it. Like you couldn't test it. And so that memory of the arms plunging into the red ice, the memory of opening up this box, and at the same time I was pouring hot water from a kettle that had been arranged. I would pause during my reading or talk to pour hot water on this imagined heart, and also trying to get it open and struggle in front of audience. And that is the memory of the image that was so fleeting, but I felt it and you noticed it too. So thank you, Collier.
The struggle.
The struggle.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, this makes me think too of how much of your work before this book has drawn on a performance or a ritual, or what you call, an offering in this case. I'm thinking of Schizophrene, which you mentioned in connection, thinking about migration and trauma and mental health, that the core act of that book, that it's kind of built around. Do you have it? Are you you're gonna? Oh,
no,
okay.
That was I was dehydrated, so I was just saying. Oh, okay. Cheers. Let's do cheers, Collier. Let's do cheers with the book. And the
I'll get actually. We'll go mug to mug. Here we go. Okay. Thank you for that pause. I'm just thinking about how, the act that book forms around is you're taking a book, which I think you write is a failed epic, and throwing it into your garden in Colorado and letting winter have it, and then gathering it in the spring and then writing the book from those fragments. So I'm thinking about that as a gesture, like a fleeting gesture, but also one that lasted all winter, and then required some recuperation. And then also thinking about Banlieue, when you lying down is the gesture there, right? Like that book imagines Ban lying down, but also you recreate that multiple times and write about that, and write that you wanted to write a book that was like lying down. So I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the relationship between performance or ritual, or even repetition of ritual, and capturing a gesture, and then the act of writing, like the writing as something is, like you said, is distinct, right? The book is distinct from the work. This is a large question, but it's what I really want to know.
Yeah, that sounds really good. I'm just doing a bit of time travel. Maybe I'll go back to what it was to open the door, and maybe I'll go back to those words, failed epic. And so maybe there's kind of just kind of a moment like coming to the limits of the discipline. And here it might be poetry, or it might be the English language, or it might be writing, or it might be transcription, or it might be bookmaking. Actually, it takes me to the question, like, what is a book? And having a chance to connect with your work a little bit before this event, I paused and stopped and was so compelled by the imagery, like to do with a Rolodex, if that's the right word, like a circular book that you've created, and also erasures that happen horizontally, vertically, but also kind of in this other rotational plane, I want to say. So beyond the sagittal reality of the page, to use the language of the body. And so maybe, performance in particular, or installation is another way to kind of attend to the curvature of the book and its decay over time. And the failed epic, if I have to think what that is, began in 1999. So the book was published, Schizophrene, in 2011 or 12. So whatever that amount of time is, like a 12-year time span. I'd been invited to give a reading in the basement of the Left Hand bookstore in Boulder, Colorado, with Laird Hunt, a novelist, and Akilah Oliver, a poet who passed away some years ago. And for that event, I quickly wrote some notes, like a long poem. In fact, a poem that looks a lot like the poems in How to Wash a Heart, which for anyone who knows me are lineated and very much resemble poems, which is unlike the way that I've been writing. So I will say that throwing my notes, which had accumulated for so many years, at that point, 7 or 8 years, and I had not been able to achieve or kind of develop a form, and I hadn't figured out the technology by which the fragments that I'd written down, the technology by which the fragments might then attract, meaning magnetize each other. So I'm always looking for a form in the thing that we're calling the book that is quite effortless, so that it does take me 4 days, 2 days, this kind of very quick time, because I'd much rather take the time to think, to let the book do its own work in its own time. But on that night, the night I threw my notebook out of the door, it was not an intentional gesture. I was irritated. I was abject. It was Christmas Eve. I wasn't with my son. I had gone on a date with a rabbi. It had not gone very well. During the date, he talked about the fact that Natalie Portman had wanted to date him, but he hadn't realized because he'd been in another reality. And so I was like, I cannot compete with the likes of Natalie Portman. This is the stuff that went into the dramatic gesture. I was like, forget this. And he left. And then I just threw the notebook out of the back door of my garden and only glimpsed it come spring, muddy, contorted, wet, icy, curved, rotten, very much like a seagull, I thought, or a cormorant out there. There was a delay. So I think that's one thing that I could say, that I don't think of myself as a performance artist in a kind of functional way or an intentional way. But in this case, maybe it was the beginning of paying attention to the debris of an idea or, language itself, and making the work out of that debris. And if I have to think about, like, why did I go into the garden to pick up the notebook? How did I notice that some of the sentences were still legible in the 30-second walk from my muddy, snow-encrusted shit garden to get to the trash or the recycling bin? It was just like the chance of like glancing down at the notebook and then kind of thinking, oh, I should write some of those things down. But I still threw it away. It still was into the recycling bin. At no point did I understand that this was a book that was being written. So that's one kind of modification. And also, like, for Ban, performance or building a chrysalis in my garden, or another collaboration with earth artist Sharon Carlisle, who wanted to build a mud female Buddha, who wanted to work with the form of the body. And sort of in the stages between her clearing of a rectangle of earth in my garden and what it was to start kind of making clay out of that mud, I lay down in that rectangle. And that's, that's like thousands of miles from an English street and so many decades past. So in that case, like, to think through migration, diaspora, it was functional, because there was nothing in Colorado that evoked like the sensory memory or association. So I found that I had to substitute or replicate environments in order to attend to memories that didn't naturally form. Now I'm back in England, my birthplace, after most of my adult life away from it, and it's happening differently. I don't think that I have as much need for installation or performance in the same way.
Really?
So, yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, installation as, for me, a diasporic form, but also thinking of, like, I had a tea or a lunch with Samuel Delaney, and I asked him that question about fragments. And we spoke a lot about the chrysalis, and how a chrysalis allows its unguents, its, you know, interior kind of vectors to coalesce. And so that was very important as well. I began to build, think about like building a chrysalis around a book or around a process, or simply like in the environments that I was in to write nearby. Clear, I'll pause there. So there's just maybe two ideas. One that is about failure or the limit of a text for me, and needing other ways to think, but also remember. And the other one is something about writing from afar. So, you know, there's a term from Ghislaine Kinwani, of Race Reflections UK. And she used the phrase cultural homelessness or cultural placelessness. And perhaps in my own way, like the work with installation was a way of, you know, adhering to the place that I was without becoming embedded in it. And that's in the context of the United States, where you could say I was a settler presence. So what is it to connect with the ground and the earth that is not yours? And at the same time, to kind of experience adherence, lightly so.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what a chrysalis does too, I suppose. It adheres lightly. You bring up, so you're back in the UK after a couple of decades, I think, in the US. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. I went when I was 22 for a year, but just ended up prolonging my master's thesis. But I had to come back a lot in the 90s. My father fell ill, and I had to support with my sister, like to support my mum and support her in returning to India. So I think I returned permanently to the US in 1998 to go to massage therapy school. Actually, I had stepped out of academia and wanted to think about gesture, nervous system, body, all of this language that, you know, I just wanted to have a different through line, a different work. So 98, and then I came back permanently to the UK, semi-permanently, permanently in 2019. Yeah.
You write in How to Wash a Heart, or the voice in How to Wash a Heart asks, is a poet an imperial dissident or just an outline of pale blue chalk? And I'm thinking about how you've just moved empires, I guess, in a sense. And How to Wash a Heart, was it written in the UK?
It was edited here, or I looked at the final draft here on the grounds of Churchill College, and some of the magic there in hearing Imperial Dissident comes from Insurgent Empire by Priya Gopal. And before I applied for the fellowship that brought me to Cambridge, I was reading that book, like learning a little bit more about, how does Priya Gopal say, reverse tutelage, so that the idea of anti-colonial resistance or liberatory thinking and action towards independence was not something cultivated in the West, but actually, like, her work studies all of it happened the other way around, or she's studying and writing about the conduit of liberatory, practice, and in another way. I found it so interesting and wanted to kind of, think beyond my own history or the history of my family, and to think across empires, as you said. Mm-hmm. So that phrase and that language of imperial distant comes from her. But I've ended up in Churchill College, where Priya Gopal is a fellow. And so that was extraordinary to me, to have felt so close to that work, and then to have arrived in the place that she, in fact, is. And the outline of pale blue chalk is actually a memory of Ban, or from Ban, because so have/had/have something that's called a garden or a backyard. It was terrible, couldn't manage it. And so my friend, the earth artist, said, can she build this Buddha? And said, yes. So there's this rectangle, and we've cleared it, and she scraped it. And this goes on for weeks, clearing the branches. Then I lie down, then I stand up. And so Sharon began to kind of make this, she began to shave chalk. She works a lot with chalk anyway, and created the outline of my body with blue chalk on the ground. And part of my work is having memories, I suppose, trying to retain the feeling inside my body during a performance, or when I am inhabiting an installation. And for me, that's, again, back to poetry. It's not just the the things that you can perceive through the senses or the five senses, but also the interoceptive nervous system, which is to do with, the sense of balance or nausea, the sense of having internal organs, vestibular function, everything that we're not actually meant to feel, because it would mean we're in severe pain, but our sense of maybe being connected to a magnetic or gravitational field, and also relationally, like the strange kind of fleeting experiences of disgust or desire or emotion that can happen relationally. So all of this was happening as I was lying down and making gestures of reaching, touching, unfurling, activating, and to kind of use the language of body work, like trying to be present enough, maybe during, but also immediately afterwards, to think about the places where gesture is caught or glitches, and to kind of trace that sensory motor sequence. So that's like the energy that moves along a nerve, and to transcribe that gesture, the inside of a gesture, you could say, the nerve inside a line, to the thing that we think of as a sentence in language. And so that's syntax for me, and the way that the sentence lies on a page. And that's what I perhaps meant, I don't know, by lying down inside a book. It's the memory of those kind of delicate movements, and trying to graph them, I suppose, to make the sentence a kind of index of bodily life. And so the blue chalk comes from, is the imprint of the body, and does that imprint hold memory? But for me as well, it evoked the work of Ana Mendieta and the Silhouette series. And so another register would be, for me, homage. I think it was happening differently for my friend. And maybe now, in the context of police brutality in the United States in particular, and in so many places, what it is to draw the outline of the body on the ground in protest and memory, and ritual of another kind. So that's something about the lineage of that image, which is also, I realize, just kind of remembering what it was to work with someone, remembering the smell of the earth, what it is to make clay from mud. And, you know, as Sarah Ahmed says, citation is a feminist issue. So it's also like acknowledging the labor and brilliance of all of the people I've been so fortunate to have shared my life with, or to read.
To be collaborating with.
Yeah, to be collaborating with, even if the other person doesn't know maybe that you're collaborating with them, because I didn't know Priya Gopal then. And when I said K on the first page of the poetry reading I gave earlier, that's Kate Zambrano, the novelist or nonfiction writer. And so it's kind of horizontal evolution, if you will. Like, just because something is hybrid doesn't mean the different parts of it have to touch. Like, it doesn't have to be a merge, but you can have the microbial transmission across the abyss or gap between bodies.
I love your thinking also about the magnetic quality of fragments, like that you look for a way for them to attract each other. And in a sense that's what perhaps finding the form of a book is. Yeah. You're finding a form of the work. I wanted to ask you too about, so you said you started in the US as, you're doing a master's, and then you were doing a massage therapy program, which, so I wanted to ask you about the last note of the acknowledgement in this book, is about acts of care. I'll read it to you. I have it in my notes. But you said that the story of Boma, which is a story that you recount in a later part of How to Wash a Heart, you did not read tonight. But you say that it was told to you by your mother, verbatim, in a moment of caring and being cared for that was indistinguishable from creative pleasure. And you also thank a friend in those acknowledgements for making you tea all day when the book began to come to you, when you began to hear the voice on her sofa, and she'd make you tea all day. And so I'm just thinking about what the relationship for you between creative pleasure and acts of care is. You know, I think of a massage therapist as someone who wants to do that, as a person who's invested in bodily care and in, you know, the individual acts of repair and touch, and how
how that all flows together, which is for me the other question of like how to live, or maybe just kind of a strange idea about becoming a poet that, I don't know, early on, like my grandfather, my mother's father, used to go on his, in fact, that memory is kind of hidden inside the book. Ethically, even though it is like a fiction, for me, spiritually or ethically, I know that every part of the book is made from, how to say, life. So the memory of my grandfather kind of mixed up, transposed, maybe in not the right place, not the right history. How do you kind of create something universal yet individual? But he used to go on his horse like throughout the domain. What is a domain? It's something beyond the borders created in a particular era, such as the Radcliffe Boundary Award, you could say. But he had, let me put it this way. I once arrived in India having flown cheap airline, Air Turkmenistan, no longer in business. Just very strange airline, very cheap. And I arrive a bit haggard. My grandfather was very old, and cognitively, like, things had changed, and he wasn't present as he used to be in that particular way with language. But I said, "Oh, hi, Pitaji, I've just come from Turkmenistan. We had a stopover in Ashgabat." And he just suddenly became alert. And, you know, from deep within, recovery or non-recovery from a stroke, maybe a process involving the brain that nobody used any particular language for. Suddenly he began to recite the poetry of the city of Akshobad, the love poem that is central to that city, because as a young person, he'd gone on his horse or traveled, and he would memorize, learn the language, and bring the poetry, back in his body, or transcribed, I suppose. So I'm suddenly like thinking of that galloping muddy horse, and that model of like how we hold poetry in our bodies, and what it is to have community as a poet beyond our particular place that we live. I think it's why I love this event and its many time zones and territories, and that you should be in the world. And for me, body work and waitressing, I should say, all through my 20s, and selling space around a map. Like, I never thought that becoming an academic was the way at that time to become a poet. So bodywork was also a way to be part of the world that I was in and the community that I was in. And I should say that I, came to the end of being able to balance doing that and like figuring out academic work as access to health insurance. And but in the way that I'm using care in the book, that's about the life that I lived with my sister and my mother. We both share in the care of my mum, and the way that we're living is so strange, I suppose, or so traditional. But every day we try to create art, to create mandalas, to it's all on the other side of this wall right now. My mum, hang on, here's a polar bear my mum knitted. Hang on, hold on. This is a polar bear.
Strange,
this is what's
but
going on.
Oh, it's lovely.
Yeah, strange.
It's a huge nose.
There's a lot of, it's a very big nose. This is actually a surprise for our friend Harriet Trusker, a poet here. But so I can't imagine Harriet is watching this. But happy Christmas, just in case. So that's all it is. Our whole life here is telling stories, remembering them, and no, this is not. I'm not in Paris. I'm not sitting on a balcony, Collier, drinking coffee in my negligee. I'm not in Berlin smoking cigarettes, menthols. I'm not in Buenos Aires dancing the tango with a hitman. I'm nowhere.
What kind of poet are you?
I'm in my sister's bedroom in the most ordinary of domestic circumstances, and it turns out that you can write in your life just as it is, and rather than feeling anxious about that or comparing myself to others, I've just decided to just be in it and just carry on. And also I have to say that's everything to do with the healthcare system and, am I about to say these words? The Clinton administration, yeah. Because Bill Clinton, in the early 90s, he cut back what even legal immigrants to the United States could access in terms of healthcare or social care. And so when my mum came to the US to live with us, and she fell ill and she couldn't access healthcare, and we were at an indigent clinic, and I was having a full-time academic job and a part-time academic job and another full-time academic job visiting gig, because it was terrifying to think of the cost of elder care and health insurance, and it was so stressful. And essentially that's the reason ultimately that I've returned to the UK, but it's because of the immigration policy here changing in 2014, you can't actually function fully as a resident until 2 years have passed. So this week, yesterday, my sister and I spent hours filling out the forms that would allow my mum to access, you know, other kinds of support. So the understory of like,
oh yeah,
care and caring is this kind of shared kind of idea between the US and the UK, that just all of the cuts, I would say, to social care. And I say this as someone with the immense privilege of being able to cross the borders of both countries. Can you imagine for a moment what it would be like and what it is like for people without, and families without the resources and privileged access that we have? It's hard for us. I can only imagine that it's excruciating for
the scale is
others.
We are getting close to out of time, but I would like to have a moment to check in the question box. I see that Julia has asked a terrible question from an academic. She says she noticed that you moved from independent publishers for your works to university press. And she's curious about why.
Yes, my friend Sandeep Parmar, a brilliant scholar and poet who's based in the UK, put me in touch with Pavilion Press, run by Darren Rhys-Jones, and suggested, or in the language used, said, oh, it's just a small press. So in my mind, that meant small press. And that's the way that I encountered publishing in the US. Like it's like a community-based model, community trust, community feeling. And that was enough for me. I knew I had to write a book and have it published in England for people to think of me as a British poet. This is before I'd applied for anything. So it's part of my cunning plan to become British again. And it's totally worked, as you can see, tartan curtains.
There you are.
But also I was mistaken, and I hadn't fully realized that it's actually a university press. So it's a small press, but it's a university press. And it was fantastic, efficient, exactly what I needed. Small press culture can be very slow. I love that too. And this was just very functional, and I have achieved my extreme goal of Englishness.
Repatriating.
Yeah, in a way, reverse migration for sure.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for talking with me. I could do this forever. I could sit and chat with you over tea. I would love to. But I just want to say in closing that what I've always admired about your writing is the way you make a home for me as a reader inside your particular intelligence. I just always feel welcomed in your thinking as you were thinking. And that for me is, well, I experienced that as an act of care and as a poet and as a reader. And so it means a lot to me to get to talk to you. And I just want to say thank you for sharing your thinking with us.
Thank you, Collier. I can't see you anymore. There's a sort of like a Space Invaders emoticon and violet smudges. But that's okay. I look forward to drinking tea with you, A, where you are, B, where I am, C, in a place that we have not visited each other yet. I look forward to that, Collier, and to learning more and more about your work. Thank you for this beautiful hour.
Thank you. So just a few remarks for our audience. This event is going to remain online to view on demand until the end of November, with Chinese subtitles uploaded in a few days. This is the 5th day, as Julie mentioned, of the 21st edition of the Hong Kong International Festival. Hello, Bear. And please do visit the festival website for details of more than 70 online and live events between now and the 15th of November. We'd love to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Banu. it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everyone.